Welcome to Black Horror Stories. Today, we share 4 horror stories based on black magic and voodoo with you. Please enjoy and keep connecting in the comments. Welcome to Story 1, named The Missing Son. My son went missing 10 years ago. I woke up before my wife, only to find our front door open. I panicked when I checked his bedroom and found he was not there. He was only 5 years old. We searched for many months. We put out hundreds of missing persons posters. A picture of my son, Eric, on his 5th birthday, wearing a blue and white checkered shirt and a silver pendant around his neck. My wife, Natasha, was beyond devastated. She couldn't sleep, and she barely ate. It got to a point where she was hardly functioning. "We will get through this," I would say. "Do you think he's still out there?" Natasha only answered, "I'm not really sure anymore." I don't know what hurt the most. The possibility that Eric was alive, but forced to endure some unbearably awful situation, or the possibility that he was dead. I didn't like to talk about it. I shut my wife down every time she brought it up. We all grieved in our own way. Somehow, the hardship brought us even closer. While this kind of loss would tear most married couples apart, it only made us stronger. It was the way she was there for me, the way she picked me up when I was down. A few years later, Natasha found out she was pregnant a second time. She was nervous, feeling as if she had failed once. I reassured her that things would be all right this time. I couldn't afford her having parenting insecurities. She gave birth to another son. We named him Erickson, after his brother. As our son grew up, I noticed there were strange similarities between the two. They looked so much alike that they even had the same birthmarks on their cheeks. When I had pulled out a few of Eric's old toys, it was like Erickson recognized them. He even gave his brown teddy bear the same names that his brother had. They also liked the same foods and the same cartoons. We felt like we were blessed with a second chance. Erickson was closer to my wife than he was with me. I didn't mind, of course. It gave me more time to focus on my work to provide for them. I was present as a father, but I wasn't fond of babysitting, as I would call it. To be honest, I think the similarities were too much for me. Maybe it was just too painful. I didn't mind it, though. I know it's very selfish, but I liked the fact that our second son preferred to spend all his time with my wife. Once, I had even offered to take him to the play park, but he refused. He wanted my wife to go instead. Then something very alarming happened. I took Erickson to the play park. It had a large play structure which he enjoyed, and was surrounded by a few bushes, which I enjoyed. I watched as he played the same way Eric did when I used to take him there. He was headed down the slide when a notification on my phone distracted me. I pulled it out and saw it was a text from my wife. She was wondering what we were going to eat this afternoon. I replied to her quickly, then returned my gaze to the play structure. To my shock, Erickson was nowhere to be seen. I swear I had only taken my eyes off him for a few seconds. I frantically began to search for him. After running aimlessly through the bushes while calling his name, I finally found Erickson. He was underneath a tree and was digging up something. I shouted as I rushed to him. He turned to look at me. His hands were covered in dirt, and he looked worried. "What were you thinking coming out here?" I asked as I grabbed him by the shoulders. "Do Do you know how much you scared me, huh? You could have gotten yourself hurt. Do you understand that? Never run off like that ever again." He apologized. I hugged him and sighed in relief. "What are you doing out here anyways?" I questioned. He pointed his little dirty index finger to the hole he had started to dig. I raised my eyebrows curiously and walked over to the shallow pit in front of me. I told him not to play in the dirt. "But Daddy, I have to keep digging," he exclaimed. "I have to show you something." "Show me what?" I spoke. "Daddy, just keep digging. You must see for yourself. It's a deep hole." I don't know why, but I felt compelled, like I was under some obligation to listen. I found a dry stick, big and strong enough to use for digging. Erickson did as he was told while I dug. He stayed nearby. I dusted off the hard surface I had struck moments ago, only to find something that was an off-checkered blue cloth. I dusted away the dirt until I could make out what I was looking at. There, in front of me, was a child-sized skull. Beside it, I saw something shining in the light. I picked it up to reveal it was a silver pendant, one from a set I had bought Eric on his 5th birthday. "What the hell is this?" I stammered. "What the hell is this?" "It's me, Daddy," Erickson started to say. "That's where Mommy left me after she put me to sleep." As I stared at the grim discovery before me, my heart pounded in my chest with a mixture of horror and disbelief. My mind struggled to process the revelation that unfolded before my eyes. Could it be true? Could my beloved wife, Natasha, be capable of such a heinous act? Erickson's words echoed in my mind like a haunting refrain. "That's where Mommy left me after she put me to sleep." The weight of his words bore down on me like a leaden burden, threatening to crush my very soul. In a daze, I stumbled backward, my mind reeling with shock and disbelief. How could this be happening? How could I have been so blind to the truth for all these years? The woman I loved, the mother of my children, had deceived me in the most unimaginable way. But even as my world shattered around me, a cold, creeping dread began to slither its way into my consciousness. As I looked into Erickson's innocent eyes, I saw something lurking beneath the surface. A darkness, a malevolence that sent a chill down my spine. And then, as if on cue, the air around us seemed to grow thick with an ominous presence. Shadows danced at the periphery of my vision, and a sense of foreboding settled over the scene like a suffocating blanket. Suddenly, a guttural voice pierced the silence, sending shivers down my spine. "You cannot stop us," it hissed, its words dripping with venomous malice. "We are Legion, and we will not be denied." Panic seized me as I realized the full extent of the horror that surrounded us. My mind raced with 1,000 questions, each more terrifying than the last. What dark forces had my wife been entangled with? And what did they want with my family? But even as fear threatened to consume me, a fierce determination took hold. I would not let these malevolent entities claim my family as their own. With a newfound sense of resolve, I reached for Erickson's hand and pulled him close. "We have to get out of here," I whispered urgently, my voice barely above a frantic whisper. "We have to run." But before we could make our escape, the shadows coalesced into a writhing mass of darkness, blocking our path. I felt a cold dread settle over me as I realized that we were trapped, at the mercy of forces beyond our comprehension. And then, just when all hope seemed lost, a blinding light pierced the darkness, illuminating the scene with a brilliant radiance. Through the glare, I saw the figure of a young boy, his face twisted in a rictus of agony. It was Eric, my long-lost son, reaching out to us from beyond the grave. With a silent cry, he beckoned us toward him, his presence a beacon of hope during despair. With a surge of adrenaline, I gathered Erickson into my arms and raced toward the light, my heart pounding in my chest with a mixture of fear and determination. As we drew closer to the spectral figure of my son, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, as if his presence had chased away the darkness that threatened to consume us. And then, in a blinding flash of light, we were free. The shadows receded into the darkness, leaving behind only a sense of profound relief. As I looked into Erickson's eyes, I knew that we had triumphed over evil, thanks to the unwavering strength of my beloved son. In the end, justice prevailed. My wife, Natasha, was caught and put on trial for her terrible deeds. Despite trying to run away, she couldn't escape the long arm of the law. I believe that with the help of my son's spirit, the authorities tracked her down. In court, she tried to look tough, but as the evidence piled up against her, she crumbled. The judge gave her a life sentence, meaning she'd spend the rest of her life in jail. It was a tough blow, but it was the only way to make her pay for what she'd done. Even though justice was served, the pain of her betrayal would linger. But we found comfort in knowing that my son's spirit would always be with us, guiding us through the darkness. And with his memory to light our way, we knew we could face whatever challenges lay ahead, together as a family. Welcome to Story 2, a close encounter with the paranormal. My name is Sarah, 47 years young, and I have an experience to share with you all. My strange encounter occurred on June 2023, not too long ago. My son usually gets up around 5 a.m. to head to work, so I'm naturally awake until he leaves the house. I have my household chores to do every morning, and on this morning, everything went smoothly. My husband also had to leave for work early, so I was home alone. To keep myself busy, I did some crafting and eventually grew sleepy. By 11:30 in the morning, I decided to take a nap and lay down on my bed, closing my eyes as sleep approached. As soon as I closed my eyes, I began to feel uneasy. I tossed and turned in my bed, unable to find a comfortable position, when suddenly I heard distinct footsteps. They sounded like running footsteps, as if there were several children. I got up, looked around my bedroom, but saw nothing. Feeling drowsy, I lay back down, and then I heard it again. Those running footsteps. As I listened to the footsteps, it felt like my eyelids were getting heavier, and my vision became blurry, as if a cloud was forming over my eyes. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed all over my body. Lying there, I could still hear those footsteps echoing through my home. I struggled against it, trying to break free from whatever seemed to be holding me, but I couldn't. I noticed the bedroom door was open. This had happened to me before, being suddenly unable to move and hearing footsteps in my house. So I immediately began to pray to myself, asking Jesus to help and protect me. I felt a strong urge to call out God's name, and I repeated it in my head. God help me, God help me. And then, gradually, I started to regain some movement. I could even move my arm a little. I felt incredibly weak afterward, as if the strength had been drained from my arms. It felt like I had been in a fierce battle. My vision also cleared, as if the haze had lifted from my eyes. I wiped my eyes to see better. That's when I clearly saw two figures standing in the doorway of my room, facing me, one short and one tall. I couldn't see the face of the short one. It wore a blue cloak with a hood, and underneath was all black, with its head bowed down. The other tall entity wore the same clothing, but had a black witch's hat on, visible under her cloak. What was strange was that this entity had taken on the appearance of my younger sister, Jennifer. I was startled and bewildered, and I asked in confusion, shock, and disbelief, "Jennifer, what are you doing here? What have you come to do?" The figure looked at me, smiling, and said in a calm tone, "So, all this time, you didn't know there were people in your house?" And with these words, the tall figure walked toward me. The shorter one stayed at the doorway and did not accompany the taller one. The tall figure, resembling my little sister, stood at the foot of the bed, looking at me. Then, just like that, she disappeared right before my eyes, and simultaneously, the shorter one by the door vanished too. After their disappearance, I could move almost immediately, as if I had been released from an invisible grip. I didn't know what to make of it, and was naturally shaken by the experience. It kept me occupied, but I eventually went back to sleep because I was so exhausted from what had happened. As the day progressed, I decided to take an afternoon nap around 3:30 p.m. I don't remember exactly which day it was, but I was lying in bed and I saw something strange peeking at me from my door. It was a sort of hairy figure with a face peering around the corner of the door. I was terrified and didn't know what to do about this thing staring at me. After a while, it went away on its own and was nowhere to be seen. I immediately got up and threw a type of disinfectant at the spot where I saw the thing and did my saying to chase it away. I said, "This is my house. I am the boss here, and I want you to leave. Get out of this place because you are not welcome." At the spot where that thing appeared, I felt a kind of lingering energy, like electricity running through me. When my husband came home from work, I told him everything and went back to stand next to that door. And I still felt that strange energy. My husband suggested that maybe the entity needed someone to help it find its way to the light. As I stood by the door, the strange feeling in the air made my skin prickle with unease. Despite my husband's suggestion to help the ghost find peace, I couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was at play. Night came, but sleep eluded me. Tossing and turning, I couldn't stop thinking about the eerie figures that had appeared in my room. Why did they look like my long-lost sister, Jennifer? What did they want from me? Unable to rest, I turned to old family records for answers. Digging through dusty albums and faded papers, I uncovered a chilling story from the past. It spoke of a family torn apart by secrets, and among them was Jennifer. As I connected the dots, I realized that the spirits haunting my home might be tied to my family's troubled history. Was Jennifer's ghost trying to tell me something? Welcome to Story 3, a tragic tale of promises and consequences on the plantation. This eerie tale unfolds on a remote plantation. Rhea had a seemingly perfect life. She had recently married a loving man who would do anything for her. However, he had been married before and had a child from his previous marriage. Rhea adored the child, but unfortunately, the feeling wasn't mutual. Despite her best efforts to win the child's affection, there was a palpable distance between them. child remained fixated on memories of her own mother, who tragically perished a few years prior in the Suriname River when their canoe capsized during a crossing. For 3 years, Ria patiently endured, telling herself it was a process that would eventually succeed. She also longed to have a child of her own, but had yet to conceive. When the weight of her struggles became too much to bear, Ria would retreat to a secluded spot with dense foliage, where she would weep her sorrows away before returning home. One day, she found herself beneath a towering man-jack tree, sobbing uncontrollably. Why can't it happen? She lamented aloud. As she wiped away her tears, she noticed an elderly woman sitting beside her. The woman had a kind expression and asked, "What's troubling you, my child? I see you here often. I live nearby. Can I help?" Ria managed a weak smile through her tears and replied, "No, thank you, Grandma." "Grandma, that's what I'd love to hear," said the woman wistfully. In that moment, Ria felt compelled to confide in the stranger about her heartache. After pouring out her soul, the woman gently wiped away her tears and offered, "I can help you." Ria eagerly accepted the woman's offer, but there was a catch. "You'll get what you desire, but I want something in return," the woman said cryptically. "What is it?" Ria inquired. "You'll receive something for yourself. I don't ask for much, just that the other girl. She will also call me Mama," the woman replied. Ria hesitated for a moment, but agreed, thinking to herself, "As long as I gain something for myself, she won't want me anyway." The old woman handed her a small vial of liquid and said, "Promise me, my child." With a sense of foreboding, Ria made the promise and accepted the vial. "And good luck," the woman added, wearing a serene smile as she walked away. "There's no turning back now, Ria. You've made a promise," she reminded herself. Days turned into weeks, and Ria found herself pregnant. The child was born, bringing joy and happiness to their family. 2 years passed, and Ria had all but forgotten about the old woman and her promise. But then, one evening, there was a knock at the door. Ria's husband answered, and she heard someone asking for her. Approaching the door, she saw the old woman standing there, her expression troubled. "You have everything you wanted, don't you?" the woman said. "But what about your promise? You've forgotten." Ria was confused and shaken. "I don't know you," she said to her husband, dismissing the woman as insane. In the days that followed, the woman appeared on their street every evening, crying out, "You made a promise." Ria's husband, determined to uncover the truth, approached the woman. But each time he got close, she seemed to retreat, leading him farther and farther from home until he found himself on an abandoned road, an old cemetery looming in the distance. Suddenly, the woman was behind him. "A promise must be kept," she whispered ominously. Before he could react, she vanished into thin air. Terrified, he raced back home, but fever overtook him, and he fell into delirium. The nightmare had begun. His sanity slipped away as he lived on medication, eventually confined to a psychiatric institution. As for Ria, she found herself haunted by the old woman's specter. Her stepdaughter fell ill, frequently engaging in long conversations with Mama in the mirror. One fateful evening, while bathing, Ria heard the familiar wailing and lamenting. The bathroom door slammed shut, and there in the hallway stood the old woman. "I'm here, and there's nothing you can do," she taunted. In an instant, the house was engulfed in flames. Rhea grabbed her towel, but she couldn't reach her daughter's bedroom. She heard their screams mingled with the cackling laughter of the old woman. Neighbors rushed to her aid, holding her back as she tried to leap into the inferno. But it was too late. She lost both her children, a heavy toll to pay. Haunted by guilt, Rhea shared her story with anyone who would listen, but many dismissed her as delusional. We believed her, though, having known her closely. Rhea is not her real name. She died a lonely death, and when her body was found, her breasts and feet were charred, but the rest remained untouched. Once a flourishing, beautiful, happy woman. But what and who she promised, we'll never know. Welcome to Story 4, The Haunting of Aunt Kamala, a tale of redemption and release. A few years ago, when I was about to get married, we had a big celebration planned. There would be festivities for 2 days straight. My best friend always says you can't celebrate anything without throwing a party. I always laugh because it's true. Luckily for me, my in-laws also love to party, so there's almost always somewhere to go. Okay, back to my story. One day before my wedding, my mom, my cousins, friends, and I were all together having a good time. I already lived with my husband, so there were only ladies at my place. My husband went to his parents' place for appearances. As they were also celebrating, we were getting ready to go to our own party, which wasn't being held at home, but somewhere else. Suddenly, my phone rang, and I thought it was my dad calling to ask where we were. It was going to be more of a ladies' night with a few gentlemen, including my dad and brother. I was busy now and asked my mom to answer the phone since I saw that it was my dad calling. I heard my mom say in shock, "What? How? When? Oh shit." You can imagine that with such statements, you immediately get scared. And I jumped up and yelled, "Mom, what's going on?" My mom signaled for me to wait a moment, and she spoke with my dad before hanging up. Those few moments felt like an eternity. My heart was pounding in my throat, expecting to hear bad news based on my mom's reactions and tears. Finally, when she hung up, I yelled, "What's going on?" She said there's bad news. Aunt Kamala passed away. I was so shocked. I exclaimed, "What?" She said, "Yes, it happened not long ago." Aunt Kamala was an adopted sister of my dad. They weren't blood relatives, but that woman loved us as if we were her own family. Not only her, but everyone in the family loved us. We had a great bond with each other. We often visited their home. We were so disappointed by this news. My mom also said that my dad wouldn't come to the party tonight because he was going to Aunt Kamala's house to see how he could help. He would come tomorrow. Of course, I didn't mind. She was just as important to us as we were to her. Although it hurt me a lot that this sweet woman was no longer with us, having passed away the day before my wedding, I tried not to let it ruin my big day. We were a bit quieter than usual, but almost no one noticed. I also felt bad that my dad missed my party, but I comforted myself knowing that he would be there the next day. The next day was the big wedding day. Everything went well, and when the moment came, I forgot all about the sorrow and enjoyed everything to the fullest. A week after my wedding, I finally thought about my aunt again. She had already been cremated, and I couldn't attend due to all the hustle and bustle. I decided to visit now to offer my condolences and comfort to Aunt Kamala's remaining family members. But believe it or not, something always came up. Every time my husband and I planned to go, something happened that made us postpone it. Eventually, I said to my husband, "You know what? Let's not plan it anymore. Let's just go." When we were out one day, you just drive there when you see it. The same evening, I fell asleep, and in my dream, I was driving to my aunt's house. When I arrived at my aunt's house, I stood in the driveway and looked at the house. It was completely dark, which seemed normal to me because it was evening. Now, I looked beside the house, and I could see everything in the moonlight. It seemed strange to me that I saw nothing in the front, just blackness. I walked closer and suddenly shivered all over my body. I still saw nothing, but felt the presence of something big and heavy. I got a very bad and scared feeling, and I walked back. I still didn't say anything and just looked. Suddenly, the black mass seemed to split apart, and I saw Aunt Kamala standing in the middle. I screamed. She looked very sad and helpless. She just stood there staring at the ground, as if she couldn't move. She seemed so unhappy, and it seemed like she didn't even have the strength to look up. Although I wanted to help her, I was still afraid of all the blackness around her. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. My heart really went out to this dear woman. I had never heard of her doing anything wrong to anyone. She never even spoke ill of others. What was happening to her now? By who or what was she being held there? While these thoughts raced through my head, I saw all these hands holding Aunt Kamala by her arms. I think so she couldn't leave. Now that I realized they were all spirits around her, I was less afraid. I dared to address them now and yelled out roughly who they were and what they were doing. That eerie laughter and those eerie faces I saw then, I can never forget in my life. I was so scared that I covered my eyes with my hands. After a while, I dared to look again, but now I only looked at my aunt. I didn't want to leave her alone and would help her. I said, "Aunt Kamala, what's going on? Who are they? How do I free you from these things?" Aunt Kamala looked at me again with a very sad expression. She said, "These are deceased family members. They are holding me here, and I can't leave." I said again that I wanted to help her, and she said again that I wouldn't succeed. They've been here too long, and they're too strong. I returned and slept restlessly that night. I usually don't tell anyone about such dreams, only when I can't get out of them. My parents often visited there, and I asked my mom how it felt there. My mom really doesn't feel these things, and she said everything was normal there. I decided to put it to the test and told my husband, "Drive to Aunt Ada's house." He looked at me strangely, but by now, he knew not to ask me questions. So, he did what I asked. This time, I did arrive at Aunt Ada's house. You couldn't see anything at first. But then, when I looked for more than a minute, I felt the same as I had felt the night before. The same fear, saw the scary faces again, and heard the eerie laughter. This time, I covered my face with my hands and told him to quickly drive away from here. I became so scared again and felt so sad. I knew that what I had seen the night before was real. I felt sorry for Aunt Kamala, but I couldn't help her. We drove past there many times afterward, planning to visit. But every time I quickly turned my face and told my husband to keep driving. My uncle and the rest of the family had blamed me for not visiting their home at all. But I said nothing. I couldn't explain to them the dire situation my aunt was in. Occasionally, I wondered how she could be helped, when I saw the black mass around her, I dared nothing more. Almost a year passed, and I still hadn't been there. I couldn't even look at the house. And one day, I was called by Aunt Kamala's daughter-in-law. She said she noticed that I no longer came to their home, but she still invited me to the church service held at home for Aunt's 1-year anniversary of passing. Her words really touched me. I was almost in tears and wanted to tell her everything, but I thought these people live there, and if they know what's going on there, something you can't see with the naked eye, they wouldn't be able to live there in peace either. I told her that I was busy, but I would try my best to come. I already knew at that moment that I wouldn't go, and I felt bad. My parents did go, and when my mom got home, I called her to ask how everything had turned out. My mom said everything went well. There was so much food, all offered to the gods and deceased family members, and it was all delicious. The weather was beautiful, but suddenly, after the church service, it started raining heavily. It didn't last long, so nothing was ruined there. There were a lot of people present, and everyone said they had eaten well. Some, especially my uncle, asked why I wasn't there. I had instructed my mom beforehand to say that I had other obligations. I was sad. I wasn't at the cremation, and now, not at the church service. When I went to bed that night, my eyes weren't even properly closed yet when I saw Aunt Kamala smiling in my living room. I looked at her with wide eyes and yelled, "Aunt, is it really you?" She said, "Yes." She only smiled, and she was super happy. She also looked very good. I said, "Aunt, how did you get here? What about the things that were holding you there?" She said, "My dear, I have been freed from everything." She said something had gone wrong during her cremation. The work was not done properly, causing her deceased family to hold her there. She couldn't leave, although she wanted to. She said that only today, during the church service, everything had been done correctly. They remembered and honored all the family members and offered sacrifices to them. And only then were they let go of her. She was finally free and could go wherever she wanted. I said, "Aunt Ada, where are you going then?" I thought she was going to her daughter in the Netherlands. She said, "No, not at all. She wouldn't burden anyone with her presence, and she didn't demand anything from any child or grandchild. No one had to sacrifice anything for her every year." She said, laughing, that she was going to the light. I was very happy for her. I said, "Aunt, forgive me for not being present at your cremation." She said, "My child, don't worry about that. It was me who ruined your big day, but I didn't have a say in it. And you were the only one who knew what kind of trouble I was in, and you were the only one who worried about how to help me. I couldn't tell you the solution, but I'm glad your uncle held the church service properly. Finally, I am free." I now said a proper goodbye to her, and she left. It's been many years now, and I have never felt her presence again. What I must add is that after the church service, I could visit their home again. The first time, I was a bit hesitant because I didn't see the black things. I stood in the spot where they had been, but I didn't feel them anymore. They must have gone back to where they came from. To this day, I haven't told anyone from there about this, but I am considering telling the daughter-in-law. Because when my uncle passes away, everything must be done properly so that he won't be held by those scary things.